What we're going to do today is we're going to be graphing quadratics in vertex form. Vertex form is y equals a, and then in parentheses, x minus h plus k. This is a really nice form because it tells us the vertex. The vertex is our hk value. Now, there's 5 steps for graphing this. First step is whether the graph opens up or down. If our a value is positive, it opens up, so it looks like a quadratic with the arrows going up. If our a value is negative, it's a quadratic going down, so the arrows are going down. How we determine that is based off of our a value. That's the value in front of the parentheses, being either positive or negative. Next step is our axis of symmetry. The axis of symmetry is an imaginary line going down the quadratic, and it shows where the graph is symmetric, where it's the same on both sides. The next part is finding our vertex, which is our hk value. It's the opposite of the number inside and the number outside. Then we make a table of values. That would be our xy chart. We put our vertex in the middle, and then we plot our points. So if we look at our first example, first thing that we're going to do is we're going to determine if the graph goes up or down. In this case, it opens up. And once again, the reason that it opens up is because if we look in front of our parentheses, this would be a positive. So our a value is positive, meaning that it opens up. Our second step is our axis of symmetry. What gives us 0 is 2, or we could think of it as the opposite here. Now our vertex, in order to figure out our vertex, it's our hk value, so 2, negative 1. But if you forget that, what you could do is take the 2 and plug it back in. 2 minus 2 is 0. 0 squared is 0. Minus 1 is negative 1. And that's how we're getting the negative 1. Our fourth step is our table of values. We have 2, negative 1 being our vertex. That goes in the middle. We pick 2 points to the left and 2 points to the right. What we're going to do is we're going to take our 3. We're going to plug it in to see what we get. 3 minus 2 is 1. 1 squared is 1. Minus 1 is 0. Now, because of the axis of symmetry, what it tells us is that if our vertex is 2, negative 1, whatever's on both sides of the vertex is going to have the same value. So those two are always going to have the same value. We're going to do the same thing with the 4. 4 minus 2 is 2. 2 squared is 4. 4 minus 1 is 3. So those values are the same. Now, our last step is we're going to actually graph it. We have 0, 3. We have 1, 0. We have 2, negative 1. We have 3, 0. And we have 4, 3. This right here gives us our quadratic. And the last thing that we're going to do is we're going to find the domain and range. Now, the domain and range, well, first, the domain is really easy. It's negative infinity to infinity. It's always that. And the reason why is because if we look at it, it goes to the left, it goes to the right, so it's all the numbers. So every domain is going to be negative infinity to infinity for the quadratic. Now, our range is a little bit tricky. Notice that our minimum value is negative 1, and it goes up. So that would be negative 1 to infinity. Now, that's when our a value is positive. Notice that when our a value is positive, whatever the k value is, it goes to infinity. Now, our next example, notice that it's negative. What we're going to have is a different range. So we'll get to that in just a minute. So looking at our second value, as I mentioned earlier, it opens down. And the reason that it opens down is because our a value is negative. Our axis of symmetry, x is equal to negative 2. Remember, it's the opposite. Our vertex, we always use the axis of symmetry because that's the middle of the graph. So it's a graph. The axis of symmetry is in the middle. The vertex and the axis of symmetry are always the same. Our k value tells us what our y value is for our vertex. And now what we do is we come up with the table of values. What we have is we have the -2, 2 in the middle. We pick 2 points to the left, -3, -4. 2 points to the right, -1 and 0. I'm going to take the -1 and plug it in. When I plug in a -1, -1 plus 2 is 1, squared is 1, but there's a negative here, so that would be -1 plus 2, which is 1. Once again, these two are the same. Then I'm going to take the 0 and plug it in. When I plug in a 0, 0 plus 2 is 2. Squared is 4, but there's a negative there, so -4 plus 2 is -2. We have -4, -2. We have -3 and 1. We have -2 and 2. We have -1 and 1. And we have 0 and -2. This right here is our graph. When we're trying to figure out our domain is really easy. It's always the same, -infinity to infinity. Once again, the reason because of that is that our graph goes to the left and our graph goes to the right. Now, our range is different than the last one because notice that it's going down. So in this case, the highest point is 2, and it goes to -infinity. So it's -infinity and 2. Notice that's what we mentioned just earlier. When our a value is negative, it's -infinity to whatever our k value is. And in this case, our k value is 2. For our third example, we first have to decide if it opens up or down. We see that our a value is positive, so that means that it opens up. Our axis of symmetry, x is equal to 1 because it's always the opposite. Our vertex, remember, is always the axis of symmetry, and it's our k value. And now we come to the table of values. So if we're looking at the table of values, remember the vertex goes in the middle because if we're looking at our graph, the vertex is in the middle of the graph where the axis of symmetry is. So we're going to pick 2 points to the left and 2 points to the right. When I plug in the 2, 2 minus 1 is 1, squared is 1, but I multiply it by 2, and that gives me 2 minus 3, which gives me -1. Now remember, these two values are the same because it's symmetric. I'm going to plug in a 3 now. 3 minus 1 is 2. 2 squared is 4. 4 times 2 is 8. 8 minus 3 gives me a 5. So now when I graph it, I have -1 and 5. It doesn't fit, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring down the x value just 1. Now it fits. -1 and 5. 0, -1. 1, -3. 2, -1. And 3 and 5. And that right there gives me my graph. My domain, once again, is easy. -infinity to infinity. And my range is a little bit more difficult. I see that it's going up. My bottom value is -3. That's my lowest value. And my highest value keeps on going, so it goes to infinity.